Is the technology industry silencing people that descend from the company line and toeing the company line? That's what we're going to talk about today in our weekly live discussion to talk about all things related to digital transformation. I'm going to introduce our guest here in just a moment, a repeat guest who's been on here discussions with me many times in the past. And I'm excited to have this conversation in particular because it is such a fun and important topic that we want to talk about here today. My name is 𝗦𝗦𝗟𝗡𝗖𝗓. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent tech agnostic consulting firm that helps clients with their digital strategies, their implementations, and their project recoveries. And this is a weekly discussion we do every week as part of our Transformation Ground Control podcast. So this is the live production that you're part of here today. By being part of this live audience, thank you for joining on LinkedIn, TikTok, Facebook, X, YouTube, wherever you're joining from today. Thank you for being here. And we are going to take audience questions here today. So would love to hear any questions or comments you have, especially on this topic, because I think it is a controversial topic. It's important. I think it's important we have this discussion because it's the dark underbelly of the tech industry. And joining me to have this conversation is Emma Roloff of Roloff Consulting. So Emma, thank you for being here today.
Thanks for having me. When you said the deep, dark underbelly, I immediately went to that ice skating scandal from back in the day where the girl was walking, which Tanya Harding and
Tanya Harding and
yeah, hopefully we don't ever reach that point right now. We're just talking about videos getting taken down, but immediately my brain went to the 90s correlation there.
Yeah, or I always think about the conspiracy theorists, when I'm talking about this topic, especially in the 2020s, there's, all the debate about conspiracy theories and fake news and stuff like that. That's where my mind goes to is thinking about that. But before I get into all the dark underbelly stuff that I want to ask you, first of all, I have to maybe just have you back up for a second and introduce yourself for those who don't know you. And
that's helpful. I dove right into where the association went in my brain. Hi, everybody. My name is Emma Roloff. I'm the co-founder of Roloff Consulting, and we help companies really hone in on how to use their digital presence to get out into the marketplace and educate people as a way of driving business. And a lot of times that is tied to how you see your vision internally, how you're communicating that with your team, how you're leading inside the organization so that it allows you to then go out and lead externally in the marketplace. And I talk a lot about that concept of digital leadership and what that looks like both inside a company and outside. And then for the context of this conversation, my experience has come from 10 years plus now. I'm getting older, over a decade in the enterprise technology space. And similar to Eric, I create a lot of content about transformations and this concept of digital leadership on TikTok and Instagram and YouTube and LinkedIn. And so today we're going to talk a little bit more about that content creation journey and maybe how we push some boundaries there.
Yeah, and that's how you and I met, actually, is by engaging with each other's content. I think it was on TikTok at first.
Sounds right, yeah.
And so over the years, we've just gotten to know each other as collaborators in social media, but also other stuff that we've done.
Yeah.
And so you and I have had conversations in the past about people first, and you talk a lot about change management. That's actually what drew me to your content, was the fact that you talk about change management, the people first aspect, don't lead with technology, know your why, all this stuff. There's a lot of stuff that you and I share in common with how we view the world. But what triggered this conversation is a little bit different because
it was an angry text message from me a couple of weeks ago, Eric. You can hear it.
Emma was freaking out. You sent me a text message. It was kind of late at night. It wasn't during business hour. It was
it was at 5 or 6 in the afternoon. Yeah. So yes. A couple of weeks ago, so for context, I had created kind of a corporate skit video poking fun at a massive ERP failure that was implemented by, let's call them 𝗦𝗦𝗟𝗡𝗡. And I had done this video specifically because I had gotten multiple comments from people talking about this. So Eric, you do a ton of content tied to ERP failures and that really great case study content on that. And typically I don't touch a lot of those specific stories. And I tend to stay a little bit more in vague land, kind of to avoid this type of situation. But I had gotten multiple comments Oh, we've got James Guten Morgenen back to our guest from Munich in the comments there. But I had gotten a bunch of comments to make a video on this specific ERP failure that was making a lot of headlines and was getting a lot of attention. And so I was like, you know what? Fine, I'll do it. There's enough like press around this one where I can make sure that the stuff I'm saying is only stuff that's coming from news articles that were published about it. I can make sure that like I'm poking fun at it, but not like I didn't have firsthand account knowledge to it. So everything I got was from news stories and news coverage that already existed about this failure. I made the video. It was pretty successful on both Instagram and TikTok, getting a couple 100,000 views across both platforms. And there were a lot of people coming into the comments talking about their experience with the software platform, as well as the Big Four consulting firm that had done the implementation. And it's like, oh, well, there you go. Clearly I gave people what they wanted. They're like, they're engaging with this video, and I went about my business. And, then the day that I texted you, I had gone on to Instagram. Now, I've never had this happen on Instagram before. And so it was like a new experience. I popped in and it was like, your video's been taken down for copyright infringement. And I was like, what the? So I clicked into it, and I have had videos like taken off of the For You page on TikTok, where stuff has been like basically not being suggested through the algorithm for people that aren't on TikTok and don't know what that means. And you can go through an appeal process to basically be like, this is content that I created. Or I've had stuff like speaking clips get flagged before because they're high quality video and they think I've taken it from somewhere else. And like, nope, this is me speaking. Like, I've gone through that appeal process a couple of times. So I didn't think too much of it. And then I went in to go appeal this video on Instagram, and it brought me to a screen where it said like, you can start by trying to talk directly to the copyright holder about this. And it brought up a screen that showed me that it was a crisis PR firm that had claimed I had used copyrighted information, which the consulting company's name was on the screen. So like maybe just because I typed their name onto the screen, but it was also in the comment that someone else had left. But it was like saying specifically what firm it was, what email address it came from, and who it was on behalf of. So I know that it was a crisis PR firm for this consulting company. And the part that's frustrating to me is like, one, I didn't use any copyrighted information, and two, their logo wasn't even in it. It was literally just typeface of the name of the company. And the part that's frustrating to me is I didn't say anything that doesn't already have news coverage.
Right.
But these
info.
Yeah, exactly. But these PR firms know if they claim copyright infringement that the platforms will take it down because they don't want to have copyright information and get tied up in that. And then when I went to go appeal it to say this is not copyrighted information through the normal mechanism, the form was broken on Meta's website. So I couldn't actually even go through the process of appealing it. So my petty self went and redacted information and bleeped out the names and reposted the video. But I was like,
the second time, the second time you posted.
What was that, Eric?
How did the video perform the second time? Did it do as well as the first one?
No, because there wasn't, the people that had seen the comment, the video that I made talking about the fact that it got down, was taken down, engaged with it. But I think the part that's interesting to me is that they think that stops the conversation. And but they can't go, the PR firm is taking down individual creators that are talking about this, but there's news coverage about it, and I wouldn't have known the details that were in my video had you not made the mistake and had it not gotten put out there. And I'm never one to believe that my content is being censored and putting on my tinfoil hat that my views are being impacted by that kind of stuff. But when I had it point blank laid out in front of me, I took a screenshot and I sent it to you. And I was like, Eric, has this ever happened to you? Because this is a new one for me. Yeah. And I know you obviously have your own experience with a similar situation as well.
Well, yeah. What's interesting though is when you sent that, I thought this is really weird because I've posted stuff about that same case study. And in fact, I just reposted it today. And this morning before this
this is my final little jab.
Yeah, well, I knew we were going to be talking about this topic in general, but I did post a LinkedIn newsletter that I had done on this exact case study. But I was actually surprised to see that, because I know you have a big following, but I would say if you and I were competing,
Oh, no.
I probably rip on the industry more than you do. And so the fact that you're the one that got called out, especially maybe it's because you know most of your content is, we were talking before we went live here about how most of your content is so positive. So maybe when you talk about something like this, it's more jarring to people. I don't know, but
I'm not sure. Maybe it was because I like pretended to be a consultant from that firm
yeah,
that it like really gave them like they're like, "Ooh, this one's really bad."
yeah, yeah. Yeah, and so I guess, the reason we wanna have this discussion here today is because it's A, it's interesting, and B, I think that it's important to talk about, and I'd love to hear the audience's take on this, is the importance of transparency in this industry. I think that's something that it drives me absolutely insane in this industry about how when I say we, I don't mean you and I, we as an industry tend to stick our heads in the sand and assume the best, assume all is great, assume that technology is amazing, and AI first driven strategies are always going to succeed. And, you and I are out there saying, no, hold on. It's not the technology. It's the people, it's the process, it's the strategy, it's the alignment, all that other stuff. But I'd love to hear from the audience, like, how important is transparency? Is this okay? Like if you're especially if you're a consultant or a vendor or a sales rep for a vendor, I'd love to hear these people's thoughts in more than anyone, because I know you've been on that side of the table, Emma, selling software, and I know you and I have had similar moral dilemmas. Both I came from the big four consulting side of things. You came from the sales side of things. We both had that experience with, call it the dark side. Don't sue me, big four consulting firms, for saying that was dark side. I hope the attorneys aren't listening right now. But I think that I would love to hear from the audience, though. How important is transparency, or is this okay? Is it okay to get censored, to get canceled, to get silenced, whatever the case may be? And that's really why we want to have this conversation. What are your thoughts on this? Like, what do you think? Is this a symptom of something bigger than this one post that you put out there, or what are your thoughts?
I think there is a general sentiment that technology is a magic solution. And everyone always talks about like whether it's the easy button. A friend Andreas Welsh, who does a lot of AI content, and he has like an easy button on the side that he uses to like joke about the same concept. And I think that this ultimately comes back to like, if people are honest about these experiences, it makes there be friction in the belief that magic exists in the capacity of how we sell technology. And so that like narrative of you have to pay attention to the hard, sticky people side of this, and you need to be intentional with the way that you implement tools, doesn't go along with the narrative of hire us. We'll take care of it all. Don't worry about it. And I think that mentality is ultimately what is like driving wanting to not talk about these failures. And I mean, look, any company has had a bad experience with a client or a horror story that they wouldn't want splashed all over the place. But I think that the biggest like piece here, when we look specifically at the big four consulting firms or these technology implementations, and Eric, you and I were talking about this before we went live, this isn't the minority experience. And that's the problem, is that it's a shared experience with literally millions of people around the world that for some reason can't be talked about, or is like heavily not talked about in the rooms where maybe it matters most for those conversations to be happening. And I think that's the problem. No company is perfect. I'm not against all consultants. I'm against the thought process that technology alone can solve all of our problems. And when we go down that path, there's massive failures, and we've all been collateral damage to that at least one point in our careers, if you're tied to technology at all. So why don't we talk about that, I think, is the bigger question in my mind.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And it's not because we want to necessarily be negative Nellies or Debbie Downers. It's because like learning the lessons of the mistakes others have made. And, one question that people ask me a lot on social media is, Eric, you've been talking about this for a long time. You've been doing this for a long time. Has anything changed in the 25 to 30 years I've been doing it? And the answer is no, it hasn't. And that's why we have to keep talking about it. It's like, why does a failure from 1998, when I started my career, why does it look so similar to a failure in 2026? Like, why are we doing the same thing?
You just like take the technology and you swap it out with the next Lego.
Yeah. Instead of JD Edwards or mainframe, client server, whatever, now you're just inserting AI tool or cloud vendor name here. And a lot of times, back to the be careful who I mention here, but one of the commonalities over 25 years is the Big Four consulting firm. So I'm not saying they're the only reason they fail and they're the only reason these patterns perpetuate, but the silencing mentality doesn't help. Because if people don't want to hear it, if people think you're full of it or I'm full of it, then they won't listen to or watch our stuff. The problem is they're listening to and watching our stuff.
Well, and I think so, like in the comments, Doug talked about, like as a thought leader who is someone that people like look up to, you kind of become a target in that scenario. And that the crisis PR firms are going to go out. They can't get at ABC. I don't know if that was one of the sources off the top of my head, but they can't get major news outlets to take down a story, but they can really quickly, say that I used copyrighted information and get my video taken down. And in the grand scheme of things, it's not like a huge deal to even me as a creator to have one video taken down. But if you do decide to go hard on this and continue to go with it and they decide to target you, you could get channels taken away that provide monetization or give you your reach, or for me, opportunities to speak on stages and that kind of thing. But I think the other part of this is that, like, when you do talk about it, you give other space, or give other people, especially on social media, space to share their experiences. And I think that's probably the more scary part than anything. Like, if a news outlet does a story, yeah, maybe people will share it. Maybe someone will grab it and post it on their LinkedIn feed and say, oh my gosh, have you seen this? But when you create a video that gets people commenting about their specific experience, because let me tell you, in that video, the comments in there, 7-year implementation, still not just like lists of all of the horror stories that you and I have seen and heard about in our career. And I know, like, Doug personally probably has seen a lot of that experience as well. When other people start to pile on, it becomes very clear that this is not a one-time situation. Like, the news might portray like, oh man, this was a really bad implementation. It impacted this public company really significantly. Their stock suffered because of it. How sad. But then when you're on social media and then all of a sudden it's all these other people coming in and being like, yeah, and you haven't even heard what happened at our company. Right. Then it becomes very clear how pervasive the issue is, as opposed to it being this one-off situation where there was an article written about it.
Yeah, totally. And, in some ways, people like you are more dangerous than a news outlet because your content's a lot more likely to go viral. And in some ways you might be your content reaches more than a lot of mainstream news outlets. And, but even then, the news outlet stuff the mainstream stuff is more contained and more.
Well, and beyond that, the mainstream outlets are like hitting my father-in-law, who's like retired and going fishing after he watches the video. My content's going directly to people that are living through these experiences because the algorithm is serving it to the right audience. So it's not only like reaching a large audience, but it's hitting like laser targeted on people that are experiencing this and giving them a spot to talk about it, which I do think for a company like that could be a lot more dangerous from a reputation standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to hear, though, from the audience. What do you think about all this stuff? The transparency, crisis management. How do we manage this whole need to be transparent, but also the vendors need to control the narrative from their perspective? I'm curious to hear the thoughts here. I also want to go to the audience. Darian on LinkedIn says hello, or good morning, I should say. Emilio is on LinkedIn, joining from Munich. Thank you for being here today, Emilio. You mentioned James Roloff, Guten Morgen from Wisconsin. I thought he was British. I thought he was an old British dude, not a German.
No, he's very German. Well, German and British, but British sense of humor, German. His
humor is British.
Yeah.
Okay. And then you mentioned Doug on LinkedIn had some good comments here. Crisis teams fight the fires they can touch and denounce the ones they can't. As a thought leader and someone who people listen to, we become targets. And I think that's well said. And then here's another comment follow-up from Doug. Says, why do things not change? The thing I would love to talk to, yet it would be seen adversely, is the Clay-Shirky principle. Institutions will try to preserve the problem to which they are or think they are the solution. Very interesting.
So I think you, so yesterday I made a post called, if you give an executive a shiny object.
Oh, is that the book?
I wish I had just put it into the closet. If we weren't live, I would like run and go get it and bring it because I physically made the book as like a little arts and crafts project for myself. Go to my profile. Cool, it's there. What was that?
Sorry to interrupt you, but that was super cool. I actually saw it last night right before I went to sleep. I was like just flipping through Instagram and that came up. I'm like, that's a really good video because it's you reading you're flipping through a book that you changed the story.
Yes. So I have the if you give a mouse a cookie book, but I adapted it to if you give an executive a shiny object. And I have to give credit to, I saw somebody else do this tied to like data science and like that concept. And after that, I was like, I have to make one. This is how ideas content work with me. Once it's there until it has like seen the light of day, it doesn't go away. And so I got out like paper and tape and like recreated this book. But Doug, it's like perfectly aligned to this principle that you just mentioned. And like I was saying, you give somebody you give an executive who is maybe stuck in like what I call the FOMO cycle, which is like you hear from a technology company, you have to adapt or die. So let's use AI as the example. You absolutely need to be using AI or you're going to be out of business in 5 years. Or all of your competitors are going to replace all of their people in 18 months. Fill in the blank with whatever we're hearing from the CEOs that are selling these solutions. And that creates fear. And that creates fear of missing out, but also fear of becoming irrelevant, right? And that makes people move quick. And it makes them go out and seek shiny objects. And the joke within the book that I made was like, you go out, you seek a shiny object. Well, once you've given them a shiny object, they're going to need a Big Four consultant to help them implement it. Right. And going through the whole story of then and they're going to want to do it fast. And then they're going to implement fast because of this fear that's associated with it. And when they move fast, things are going to get missed. And then there's going to be change orders and then change management and training and all of the other things that we know are important on the people side of change that you brought up, Eric, all of a sudden get cut from the project. And then it's like, well, why isn't anybody using this? And then after all of that whole process, by the end, when you end up at the end, the book goes, he's going to get thirsty and he's going to want a glass of milk and he's going to ask for a cookie. But it's like, so they don't get the return that they're looking for. They're confused. It didn't give them the magic solution that they were expecting when they got so fearful at the beginning. So they're going to go out and they're going to start searching for another recommendation or something else to bring in to solve the problem. And they're going to go to the Big Four consulting companies and they're going to say, here's another shiny object. Go ahead and implement it. This one is going to solve all of your problems.
Yeah.
And like when you look at some of these relationships, like going back to the original video that I brought up, the company with this massive ERP failure had a 25-year relationship with the consulting company that did this. Mm-hmm. They've been doing it for 25 years. Yeah. And now not every one of their implementations was as unsuccessful as the one that I was poking fun at, but they've had this long-standing relationship. And to your point, Doug, it doesn't change because if you truly were able to unlock the full return and get all of the magical promises that were made to you, those companies would become irrelevant. And so implementing them in a way that's going to truly give you all of the return immediately, the moment that you start using that platform, goes against the incentive structures of those companies.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And I actually have, as a side note, I have a book that's coming out next month. It's called Welcome to the Machine. And it talks about incentive structures. It talks about the systemic problems in the industry. And it touches on a lot of what you just described. But I think you're right. And what you just said that's an inconvenient truth. It's too bad you said that because now it's out there and people know. And especially,
and it's too bad. And the irony of all of this is Walker Reynolds. I was at his conference a couple of months ago, probably like a week before this video got taken down. When I took the stage there, I was like, I've come to terms with the fact that like Big Four consulting companies, and I named off a handful of software companies, are probably never going to hire me. And it was before I even created this video naming names. And I said, because even if I don't name names, creating content in this way opens up a space for other people to name names. And my content section becomes like a dumping ground for bad experiences with software platforms and consulting companies. And then fast forward a week and they're taking down some of my content. And I'm like, did I manifest this?
I know,
I accidentally brought this into the world.
Yeah. My first experience, it was actually right after I started Third Stage. in 2018. I had posted an article, a blog. I don't even know if I put it on LinkedIn or not, but it was an article about the Hertz had a IT failure of some sort. And I posted it. And the day I posted it, I got this anonymous voicemail that I saved for years. I actually had it for years, and I'd play it for people just because it was so like weird and creepy, but entertaining. And it was just, I didn't know who it was. It was a blocked number, and it was a woman's voice. And she just said, I'll get as close as I can to the exact words. And it was this tone. And she said, Eric, I saw your article about Hertz. I would be careful if I were you. And then she just hung up. And I was like, am I in the mafia? Like, is this like, am I going to get abducted now, or someone going to kill me? Is there a hit out on me now because I posted this thing about Hertz? It was the most bizarre thing. So I saved that for years. And it just sort of like, it was a good reminder that like people don't like to talk about this stuff. And it goes back to your incentive structure thing, right? I actually have a friend who lives in our neighborhood who is a sales rep for one of the big software vendors. And he got really pissed at me one day, just recently, actually, just a couple months ago, sent me these nasty texts, all pissed off because I posted something about a public sector client failure. And he coincidentally the next day had a sales call with that client. Yes, he was trying to sell his software, which by the way, it was his software that had failed 10 or 15 years ago. He's trying to sell an upgrade now. And he was pissed that I posted this. He's like, you got to take it down. What are you doing? It's not true. And I'm like, actually, it is true. I based it all on public information. If the public information is wrong, then, you might want to dispute with, the sources that I cite there. But he was super pissed off about it.
But the part is like going back to what you said, like you worked in a consulting firm. Now you did need to leave because there like obviously wasn't a way for you to necessarily push against those bounds. Right. But I will say, like, as a software sales rep, like maybe I was incredibly spoiled, but like I did work in a company when I was with we were really more of a process consulting company that resold technology. So that did give me a little bit of like, I guess, like a spoiled nature to be able to start with people in process before we fully brought in the technology. But even with the incentives to sell a solution, I was still able to talk about the things that I knew stand in people's way and be able to be honest with people of like, hey, you know what? Like, we've got a really great product. We have a really good team to implement it. But when I see customers that are successful and I see companies that feel like they're spinning their wheels, it's this people side that falls onto you that we can help support, or I can get you in connection with people to support. But that is a piece of this puzzle that makes you successful. And when I did that and I helped customers figure that out, they came back to me and I didn't have to like fight against stuff. I could just be honest. So like in that scenario, instead of getting mad, like go in and be like, hey, I know it didn't go well last time. Yeah. Tell me what you think went wrong and how do we avoid that? And what do we do to make sure that we're building this with integrity so that it gives you everything that I'm promising it will be? And I was good at my job. I made a lot of money selling software. Like, it's not like you have to, it's not an either or, it's just easier to pretend. And going back to like, can we ever fix this? There would still be plenty of work for you to do if you helped your customers be more successful with their outcomes. They'd keep coming back to you and they'd refer their friends to you. And then you become known as the person that's like the antithesis to this problem that we know is so pervasive. And like, these firms could just do the stuff they say they're going to do in terms of supporting people and managing change, but they don't. And like, so it's so easy for us to not have this be the scenario anymore.
Yeah, I feel like the industry has been lying for so long that it just doesn't know any other way, and I don't mean lying like it's not always just blatant lying, but it is sugarcoating. It's some degree of what I'll say is gaslighting. Actually, this comment here from LinkedIn, I'll pull up here related to this. When the vendor fails, the customer is always the problem in some way. Not enough money spent, wrong team to implement, et cetera. This is a big one too. I actually have a video. I can't remember if it came out yet or not on LinkedIn or on YouTube, but it's about, I think it comes out next week. It's about how vendors in the tech industry have this tendency to gaslight their own customers and say, hey, look, you're the problem. The technology works great. I mean, obviously, look, we're SAP, we're Oracle, we're Microsoft, we're awesome, right? So we're not the problem. You clearly are the problem. You don't have enough people on this. Your people resisted the change, which, by the way, it could be that the software sucks. Maybe that's why the people resisted change. I don't know, just a thought. But that's never a consideration to the software vendors. A lot of times they're like, no, you're resisting change. You don't, adapt, clean core, fit to standard, blah, 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 best practices, whatever you want to call it. So that all, so it's not just blatant lying. It's not just blatant crisis management. Let's shut down Emma and Eric. It's also other more subtle gaslighting tactics too, that I think are maybe even more harmful than what we're talking about here today.
Mm-hmm. And I think to that effect, it's not in that scenario, there's like three entities in my mind, right? There's the executive team that's like able to make these decisions, that are often the ones that get stuck in this FOMO cycle and feel like, and like this, I have a lot of like people that I respect very highly that are in these executive roles that are making these decisions. And sometimes I talk to them and they're like, the pressure to like do this or what's coming from our board, like they are not immune from the pressures of other people just because they have a high up title. Yeah. And they have the same fears associated with like losing their job if they don't do what they're told to do, or they're not like aggressive enough with moving the company forward from an innovative perspective. So this is me not dumping on executives, but saying like they are the ones that often get stuck in that FOMO cycle, but they're the ones that have the power to make the decisions. Then there's like the software vendors and the consulting firms and the vendors that are brought in that are oftentimes causing that like fear and pressure, either through that mechanism of like, adapt now or die, or by getting that message to the board, which puts pressure on those executives. And then there's like the team down here, and everything seems to roll down to the team because they're the people that don't have any real decision-making power unless they've got an executive who's giving them a voice. And like, you have to kind of like break down the structures that are in that place and create like actual communication between the team and the executives that are driving those decisions, or the people that are buying the solutions and choosing the partnerships. And that's like the real solution to this, is actually creating bi-directional feedback and communication between the executives and the team. Because I actually made a video right before we got on about like the give a mouse a cookie video. Someone was like, it's almost like this is preventable. There's like two things that you need to do to prevent this whole thing from happening if you're an executive. And that's spending the time to build digital literacy, to understand what's going on with these tools and not just blindly believe all of the promises. Yeah. Spend 2 hours digging into it, and you can figure out where AI is really well situated and where it still has opportunity, and where investing in it is going to make sense and where it's fake promises. And then you go and you talk to your team, and you say, where do you have real problems? And then if you have the knowledge of where AI actually fits and where it's going to add value, and you talk to your team and they're like, man, this problem's keeping us up at night, and that matches up with where there's actual potential, then you're still innovative, you're still moving forward, you're still making do on the pressure that's coming down from the board or whoever else, but you're doing it in a way that's meaningful. And it's 2 steps. All you needed to do was take 2 steps and slow down with that level of intentionality, and it changes the entire game.
Yeah, but why is that so difficult? Like, what? It is so simple, but it's not, like to organizations, apparently it's not, because they don't do it very often. So why do you think that is?
I think there's a little bit of arrogance.
Yeah.
In a lot of scenarios where, and I've had these conversations, now these are not necessarily the executives that I think super highly of, but I've had conversations with people where I'm like, this is simple, talk to your team. And they're like, yeah, and the example, it is like somebody gave them all a book and they read it. And this is the example that they keep coming back to, but they're like, it's kind of like the Henry Ford thing. Like if you ask them what they want, they're going to want a faster horse, but really like we want to give them a car. And it's like, okay, well then to me, that's a signal that you haven't done the job of giving your team either the resources or the space for them to build their own digital literacy, or you're hiring really bad people. Like either one of those are kind of bad leadership components. And that's not, again, it's not their problem. That's a you problem if you look in the mirror. And if you give people the space to learn about the technology, and you give them the space to tell you what they think you should be doing, I promise there's going to be some really great ideas that come out of it. And I promise that there will be things that you would have never even thought of because you're not the one doing the work every single day. But it's this like arrogance that like, because I have that like knowledge, or I'm the one that's at these conferences, I'm the one that the big 4 consulting firms are coming to give a briefing on all of this, I'm the one with that knowledge. And it's like, well, no, but like, then give that knowledge to your team and work together as a team instead of keeping them on the outside.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing how something that simple, you can learn so much from your own people, not just the conferences, not just the vendors or the big consultants or whatever. Very interesting. So, Doug on LinkedIn says, hey, Emma Roloff, you've got a fan there. Someone on LinkedIn says PowerPoint is a weapon of choice for promoting FOMO. I totally agree with that. All decisions are personal based on how good they will look in the end for making it. Another interesting, I think there's a lot of kind of like what you're saying, there's some ego and arrogance and all that stuff that goes along with it, the vanity.
There's one other piece that this just kind of how good it'll make them look at the end. That is an interesting topic that comes up in my comments a lot. And it's on tenure of executives now, and specifically the tenure of technology executives shrinking. So since COVID timeframe or a little before, we've seen this compressing of the tenure of how long technology leadership is in a company and just how long executives are within a company. And I've looked it up in the past. I don't have the stats in front of me, but I think it's less than 3 years on average for any executive to be in a leadership position within a company now. And I think it's 2.5 or something like that for technology leaders. I'll go into the comments and I'll add it later. I'll go back and find it. But the 10-year time frame is shrinking. And so what a lot of people have been saying in my comments is well, yeah, you have to go and implement a shiny object, and you don't have time to do any of that intentional adoption side, because all they care about is hitting the go live date, and then they're going to use that to launch to the next position. Or they're brought in because they're cloud first, and they've got to be cloud first before the next company needs them to go be cloud first, because the second they're cloud first, their company is going to become AI first, and they're no longer the CIO to do it. And so it's this race to try and do it as quickly as possible so that they can bounce to the next role, as opposed to truly investing in the success of the company. And that a lot of people feel like their executives are really kind of focused on their own success and bouncing quickly rather than the success of the company.
Yeah, exactly. That's a really good point. I hadn't heard that stat, but it matches what seems to be happening in the industry, and that it makes sense. It makes you wonder if these are really sustainable companies. Is it more of a shallow shell or a house of cards or something that's being built by some of these executives? Deja says she's hitting the nail on the head on LinkedIn, so thank you for that. And then Ryan on LinkedIn has a comment here. The shiny object is key. It's the idea that shifts a company from focusing on what they actually need and what their strategy is to instead focusing on implementing the technology and trying to figure out how to make that fit tool versus business strategy. This is a really good point, because it happens all the time in these big projects. It becomes you get so myopically heads down on just how do I get this technology to work? And I've got to figure out all these cool bells and whistles and the end-to-end workflow. And it's even for our own team, sometimes it's hard to come up for error and look around and say, wait, what are we doing? Why are we doing this? Why are we trying to implement this module over here that doesn't seem to work? And, and what ends up happening is you end up powering through because, someone will tell the executives oh, your people are resisting change, or this is just a normal part of the process. Don't worry. But sometimes we look at that and say, no, actually, that's a showstopper. That is going to shut down your operations if you don't figure that out and figure out a better way than what you're doing right there. But you just get so hell-bent on implementing the shiny object that you don't stop to think, do we need the shiny object? Is it actually harming us more than it's helping?
So I don't know if you've seen the report that Anthropic released recently, and they asked 81,000 people around the world for their opinions on AI and what they're looking for AI to do. And it's burned into my brain. I haven't made it through the entire report yet, but when you go to the report, it brings up a bunch of different quotes. And you can actually go in and say, I want quotes on AI in North America and what people are looking for. There's some fascinating stuff there to begin with. And we could dive into that in a whole nother conversation. But the first quote that came up from the US and North America was, we found a unicorn and we're using it to pull a cart. And it was this idea that everybody is so desperate to find a use case for AI right now
Right.
that we're just like shoving it in places and being like, it's magic. And it's like, I don't need it for email subject lines. Like, that's not where AI is helpful for me. Now, this again, and Eric, you and I have had this conversation. Sometimes people will say, and I think maybe even you said it to me one time, like, I know how you feel about AI. And it's like, well, no, I like AI. I think it's a really powerful tool. I've been selling, I sold it for 10 years. Like, before it was fashionable and I had to explain to people what AI actually was. Like,
Right.
it is an incredibly valuable tool pointed in the right direction with the right problem to solve. But the moment that ChatGPT hit the market in beta, by the way, which is like, one of the first times that we ever saw that happen at a massive scale, then everybody pushed their products in beta and everybody pushed it just for the sake of keeping up. And then all of the cascade of the FOMO happened, and now everybody wants to find a use case. But when I talk to people about like where they're using it, it's typically like, yeah, we've been told to experiment with it, and we have a dashboard that keeps track of how often we're using Copilot. It's like, but why? And they're like, yeah, they haven't told us. They're just hoping someone will figure out where it is. And so it's like all of these scenarios where they're like shoving AI in to try and help, but that's not necessarily the right solution or even a needed solution in those scenarios. Whereas like maybe going out and looking for a point solution that solves a very specific problem is a good place for you to start experimenting with it, or using it on the back end to manage massive amounts of data and those types of things. Good use cases there. And we again, kind of going back to where people said they wanted it in North America, it was all tied to the health system. It was all tied to people wanting better outcomes there. So yeah, use it there. Find ways to like improve, client and customer experience in the healthcare system, or patient experience in the healthcare system. There's all sorts of places where people are clamoring for that, but shoving AI into everybody's face to like generate images, that's not adding value to society.
Right.
We don't need any more crappy images on the internet. They already exist in plenty.
Yeah, the AI slop, I think is what it's called, or often referred to. Yeah, that's super interesting. And I know you're not against AI, but you're against AI first, or the myopic, like, we are an AI first driven company.
Mm-hmm.
You poke fun at
that. Oh
that.
yeah, I hate that saying, but that I will go down saying AI for anything first.
Yeah.
Besides people, I really can't get behind,
but you have to follow the money. Why is that? Why are they saying AI first? It's because the investors are rewarding companies that are claiming to be AI first, or claiming to use AI because they think that's going to make them more scalable, more profitable long term. So now executives are getting comped to become AI first. So therefore, they're going to drive the organizations to be AI first, even if they don't fully understand or can't articulate what that means. And so I think that's what we have to look at too,
or they're pushing use cases to be AI first, and they're pissing off their customers.
Yeah.
Like the amount of videos I've seen of people interacting with voice agents that are AI, and, being like, at first you wouldn't realize this is AI until you ask like cascading questions. And then all of a sudden, going back to this gaslighting idea, then all of a sudden it start like these AI agents will like kind of try to gaslight people into believing that they're humans. And, then there's people out there like videotaping them interacting with it, trying to trick it. And then there's like a whole PR crisis because instead of looking for a spot where it adds value, they shoved it in a spot where their customers don't want it. And that's what happens when you put technology above people and customers and employees. If you listen to your customers, they don't want to talk to an AI agent for 90% of what, like, if they're picking up the phone, it's because they didn't want to interact with your bot online. Don't give them a bot on the phone. It's going to piss them off.
Yeah. We're still paying the price for the big IVR movement of like 25 years ago, where like the automated voice response thing. I mean, that was such a disaster when it was rolled out in the late 90s. And it's still a disaster today in many ways. But yet here we are, we're still dealing with that same crap, where technology is in some ways making things worse.
Yeah.
And speaking of people and impacts of technology on people, I'm going to get to some more audience questions because a ton of them are coming in. But I want to share this one thing with you. And this is something I've told you about, Emma, and I haven't shared it with you yet. I have a redacted version against my attorney's advice. I'm going to show this letter.
It's redacted, right?
It's redacted. So hopefully that calms them down a little bit.
No, you're going to get another phone call from the lawyer,
Yes,
Eric.
exactly.
Be careful.
what exactly are you doing here? But I do want to share it because it's worth unpacking this, because I just want, you and I can share our case studies, our horror stories, examples, but seeing it in writing is somehow, to me, more jarring. And so this is a letter I got based on this. I'll give some context here. This all started with a CBS News segment out of Chicago, where someone contacted me from CBS News and said, can we interview you about this big, massive government-related ERP failure? And I said, yes, absolutely. So I was on the news, and it was a big segment, in a big market, basically calling out one of the local government agencies for their failure, and it involved a certain well-known technology vendor. So I followed that up with a YouTube video where I talk about the angle of the video wasn't just, hey, look at this project that failed. It was, look at this project that failed and look how it affected people. Like, look how it affected normal, everyday citizens. And so instead of, asking to clarify what I meant, or maybe, a lot of times vendors will send me an email saying, hey, I saw you did this video about us, but I just want to share with you some new things we're doing to improve, sort of like what you said you would do in sales. You would sort of, rather than just ignoring it or deny it, you would actually say, well, here's what we're doing differently going forward. And that, to me, that's fair. I think that's a good conversation to have. But instead, what this firm did is they stuck their attorneys on me. And let me see if I can get to the document here. So this is where they sent me a letter here basically asking me to take the video down. And what's really interesting is you read through this, and as you read through this, you start to think, first of all, I want to point out this thing right here. They talk about that I misrepresent basic facts in a 6-minute video. I'm sure you'd want to correct as, quote unquote, the most recognized and respected independent ERP systems expert in the world, given blah, blah, blah. So basically, like, not gaslighting, but they're sort of saying, you think you're so smart, but you're not. That's the way I read that. And then here it says, your mistakes include, but are not limited to. And then they go on to, they nitpick the way I said things. And I was intentionally vague in the video. I wasn't very clear about it involved this case of so-and-so versus so-and-so filed in this district court in this date. I didn't go to that level of detail. I said there is litigation pending about whatever. And I was talking about the general aspect. And my whole point was this, that there were people that were affected and were paid. The vendor had to pay these citizens for damages caused by the technology. And they go into this, and you read this and you think, wow, it sounds like you did have your facts wrong. But our attorney went through it and responded line by line and said, no, actually, he was right. And by the way, what you're saying in this letter is not what I said in the video. So they took my words and actually changed some of my words in this letter and changed what I said. And that's like, half of this here is not what I said, but yet they said I said it, and therefore I was wrong. Really strange and bizarre. So I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but this is the fun part right here. For these reasons, we demand you immediately take down your video. By the way, I got this letter right in that week between Christmas and New Year's. And so I'm like, okay, I'm not going to worry. First of all, I'm not even going to think about this. I'm not going to put any brain space into this over the holidays. Second of all, I'm just not going to take the video down. I never did. It's still up. So they give me like 3 days to take the video down. And then they look at this last little dig at the end. Going forward, we expect that you will work to at least present these objectives, facts correctly. Your clients are not well served otherwise. So just a really snarky message here from their internal chief administration officer and their chief legal officer. And look, here's the key right here. VP of corporate communications. I imagine that's where the letter originated. I'm sure this VP of corporate communications went to their legal counsel and said, is there any way we can get this guy to shut the hell up? And
but you said it was all started from CBS, like reaching out to you. They didn't send this to CBS. And that, I think, goes back to the conversation of social media being a little bit of a scary place for brands, because they're not going to go to the news outlet and say that stuff the same way that they did to you. And clearly they didn't have like actual grounds to get the video taken down because it's March and it's still there. Yeah. So they were just hoping that would spook you. Right. Yeah.
It is intimidating, right? To get even your thing that you showed me, it's like, taken down for copyright. Yeah. It's just like, oh my gosh, I broke the law. Am I going to get sued? You start to worry about all these things. And I guess it's happened enough to me now that I don't get too worried about it. And whatever, if someone wants to sue me, they will, and I'll defend myself.
I like the comment, perhaps they used AI to produce the letter.
Oh, that's funny. That's pretty funny. Yeah. And so what's funny is they never responded back to our attorney. Our attorney sent a letter a couple of weeks later They never responded. So I don't know if that goes away or not. But what's great about it is when I got the letter, I was actually a little bit excited because I thought this is going to make for great content. I've got this letter and I actually went to my attorney and said, okay, while you're drafting this response, I'm going to go ahead and use this in social media. And they're like, no, please don't. And so
well, and that's like, I thought about what it means to have them have gone through that process. And like, I did post about it and I did redact the name. I didn't want people like going after the firm, whatever. That woman who did it was doing her job. But I did like make a post about it. And a lot of people were commenting like, well, like you've reached a point where you're getting to them. Like the conversation's making enough noise that they want you to take it down. So like, don't stop, keep going was like the message that I overwhelmingly got in the comments, and a handful of people that like sent me DMs afterwards seeing it. And I think that is evidence to the topic that we kind of started with. I was like, is the transparency needed? Yes. Is there a space where these conversations, or should there be a space where these conversations happen? Yes. Does me saying like, be careful, I don't agree with the way that the big four consulting firms implement this mean that they've never been successful? Absolutely not. They clearly have a use case and a time and a place. And actually recently I told somebody that they should probably call one of them for a situation based off of like what they needed in the room.
Right.
But the blind following of like that, again, new shiny object, bring in the big consulting firms that are experts, even though it's a brand new technology. I'm going to just trust that they've given their team what they need to upskill and that they're going to be the best served to implement AI for us. But then on the back end, you see videos of people that work there that are like, I have like unreasonable billable goals, and I'm also supposed to be self-teaching on AI to be able to give all of this guidance. Like, I'm probably not best suited to do that. Like, listen to that transparency that's coming out and use it as information to make intentional decisions. And I think going back to like what my mission is, and I made a video about this the other day, my social channels are not meant to be anti-corporate or anti-software or anti-big four, anti-AI. It's literally to try and say, let's bring some nuance back to the conversation and let's bring gray back into the world so that people can recognize it's not all good. It's not magic. It's not all bad. But like, where do we find the right use cases to build the future that we want? That future gets built from intentional leadership and like clarity of vision, as opposed to implementing solutions in search of problems. And the better that we can get at infusing that intention into leadership in the digital world, the more successful our outcomes are going to be, and the more we're going to get to use technology to kind of shape the world in the direction we want it to go.
Yeah. And it's okay to ask why, I think there's a perception that by asking why, and I'm not only talking about why, like you talk about a lot, the why of digital transformation, that's super important, obviously, but even going down another layer to like, why would we implement that module? Why would we use a big four consulting firm? Why would we use AI? Like, and a lot of times people would view that like, what do you mean why? Why are you questioning it? AI is the future. Or, I for a long time got so much heat in this industry for questioning cloud. Like, why are people moving to the cloud? I still question it. Like, why are we doing this? Oh, it's because the vendors make so much money off it, and the big four consulting firms, and so there's a lot of money chasing the cloud. That's why. That's not a good reason for you, the organization, to be implementing. It may make sense for you, but you should absolutely ask why. You still may land in the same spot. That's okay. But if you by asking why, you have to be critical. We all have to be critical thinkers, but we've lost that ability.
Well, and I think it's so important too to recognize that when you ask why, it helps you remove yourself from the pendulum shift about the market, right? Like, everybody's on the cloud. Everybody needs to move to cloud. This is the only option. You need to be doing it. What do you mean you're not cloud first? Well, one, that's no longer like the biggest conversation, because now everybody is shifted over here to talk about AI first. But then in this shift of moving towards AI first, all of a sudden we're seeing like pretty massive outages from the main cloud computing companies that are out there, partially because they're trying to over leverage AI. And so
Right.
like, had you been thoughtful about your approach and made sure that like mission critical applications that are going to give you massive amounts of downtime aren't necessarily hosted in those environments, but maybe you have your own like infrastructure for that, and then you cloud host other things. Like, just because you're not cloud first doesn't mean you can't take advantage of the technology that's available to you. It means that you're taking yourself out of that pendulum swing and thinking about what makes sense for your business.
Yeah, absolutely. Here's a comment from Jim on LinkedIn. Says, this is really good. The missing link needs to be a leadership and behavior component. I think that's a lot of what we're talking about here is like, as leaders of internal organizations that are going through digital transformations, I think it's important to understand this lack of transparency and the need for more transparency and more gray, more nuance, all the stuff you're talking about, Emma. That's the whole point of this conversation, is like not to just complain, although it's fun to complain about attorneys that send letters and get videos taken down and stuff like that. It's interesting, but the real story here is, what do we do about it as leaders? Well, what you do about it as leaders is you demand transparency. You ask the questions, you dig into, a Big Four consulting firm. Let's just say Big Four is right for you, for example, and they want to put 50 people on your project starting tomorrow. Then you may not be asking, why are we hiring this firm? But you may say, why do we have 50 people showing up tomorrow to start billing full time when we haven't even gotten our team in place? That's a fair question that every organization should ask, but most of them are afraid because the Big Four consulting firm says urgency is important, speed, velocity. Your competitors are getting ahead. We need to get going now if you want to hit that time. They're all pushing you to go fast, but it's okay to stop and say, wait, why though? Why are we doing this?
Mm-hmm. And I think you just hit on, so I was listening to a podcast from Harvard Business Review the other day, and I'm sorry to the man, I don't have his name off the top of my head, but they had the previous previous CEO of the Project Management Institute on. And his hot take was that executive leaders aren't doing what they need to lead projects, and that's actually the problem. And that when you look at companies to this extent, like, do they have the intellectual capacity to be contrarian and ask why and push back and think through the nuance and be intentional? Or do they have 25 projects that they're managing, and one of them that's the most mission critical, they're going to pay the most and they're going to hand it off to someone that they think can take it?
Right.
And if that's the case, and you've got a load of being the executive sponsor over 25 projects, there is no way that you can be actively involved in enough of those projects in a meaningful way to lead them. And so he was saying like 5 max. Like,
Right.
He's like, you should not be on anything more than 5. And it shouldn't be, I spend an hour on this project a month. That's not executive sponsorship. That's not leadership. And if you are doing that, then you're not giving it then it's not a priority. And he was basically saying, like, we need to get much better at the leadership level of actually setting priorities and acting as if the things that we say are priorities by giving them the time and the attention that we need.
Right.
And that you could tell the Harvard Business interviewer, I'll throw that into the comments after we get off, was like, ooh, like, you're kind of coming in hot with this. But it was like, at listening, it's like, oh, yeah, that tracks. That's actually, he's saying the quiet part out loud.
Yeah.
So we can add him to our crew. Maybe he'll get a cease and desist soon too.
I know he's probably already gotten one. Maybe that's why he's talking about it. But here's a comment from LinkedIn: legal opinion trolls are the new legal patent trolls. I think that's an interesting thought, because I get those a lot too. Like, hey, there's a patent, you have some image on your website that you need to pay $3,000 to continue using or something like that, even though it's not open source, but what's it called?
Stock image.
Yeah. The free stuff. But oh yeah, this is fun. This is from YouTube, from Dimitri on YouTube. Your apology videos to ERP and consulting firms aren't enough. So thank you for watching my sarcastic apology videos where I apologize to the industry for calling them out. I'll probably do another one based on this conversation here
today.
You go. Yeah, and here's the comment you were mentioning before, Emma. Lean on LinkedIn said perhaps they used AI to produce this letter. And then here, Lean also said, like the quote, "We have a solution, let's find a problem," is the case. That's something that's very common. So I guess just to wrap this all up, Emma, what closing parting advice would you leave for leaders in the industry, as well as what closing advice would you leave for the other side of the industry, the vendors, the consultants, the sales reps, the Big Four? what's two sets of advice would you give for each of those two parties as it relates to transparency, visibility, all the stuff we're talking about here today?
The closing thought, and I went on a big rant about this for leadership, and this is what I take on my road show on every stage that I'm at. Leading change doesn't have to be overcomplicated. It can be pretty simple, and it comes down to having a clear vision of where you want to take your company, a good communication strategy that's actually bi-directional with your team so that you can get feedback from them on how to shape things in a way that's going to be meaningful and drive adoption for them. And then celebrating small wins and like highlighting where you're getting the benefit of the vision and that communication and implementing as you go along. Those three things don't solve all of the people problems, but they break down a lot of what we're talking about today. They interrupt the FOMO cycle and they give you the space to be intentional to make sure that you're bringing in solutions to solve real problems. So like from a leadership perspective, this is preventable and it's relatively easy to prevent. You just have to stop and look back at your team and actually treat them like teammates.
Right.
From the vendor side, I mean, I lost some deals by being transparent and not telling people exactly what they wanted to hear at all times. But I also had boomerang deals where I chose to be honest and they went with someone else and they boomeranged back to me because they learned the hard way.
Yeah.
And my customers that I built relationships off of transparency with, we were able to work through problems when they occurred quicker because we knew how to navigate that like process and actually interact and communicate with one another in a constructive way, because not every implementation I did was like all sunshine and roses. Like I'm not delusional in that capacity, but as a vendor, the more that you can do to be transparent and share the truth with people through your sales cycle and keep that line of like transparency and communication throughout, the better outcomes you're going to have. And I think a lot of times, this is one little like nugget of advice that I got from our old COO at my old job. Information is not good or bad. Information is information, but if you hold on to it and don't give it because you're afraid of what the response is going to be, you turn it into bad news. And a lot of times during implementations or during sales cycles or whatever else, we try to like hinder certain types of information because we think it's bad. If you're transparent with it, it gives you the opportunity to work through it and prepare based off of the information that you have. But if you hold stuff or you try to hide things or you keep it back, it becomes bad news or bad information down the line. So the more that you can do through that sales process and in those working relationships to be honest and upfront, the better outcomes you have and the more business you end up bringing in the long run anyhow.
Yeah, and I'd also add to that. That's a great point. I hadn't thought of a lot of this from that perspective, but one thing that came to mind too is that this industry right now is, in my opinion, in my career at least, I would consider it at an all-time high in the level of distrust that there is between end customers and software vendors and consultants. And I think the more you can be honest and transparent, it's almost like a ray of light in a very dark setting.
Yeah, you're the lighthouse then.
Yeah, and like suddenly I trust you and I'm going to spend more money with you because you're different. I can actually trust you. You admitted that you were wrong, or you admitted that your company failed, or that your company screwed up. And most people won't do that, but the fact that you did means I can trust you. And that's such a huge valuable currency in this space right now that I'm finding like our company is benefiting from at third stage because we're independent, we're agnostic, we don't sell software, so people trust us. And that trust is like, that's what we're offering. Our service offering is not because we're super smart or because we put out cool YouTube videos or whatever. It's the fact that you can trust us. And so I think the more that sales reps can do what you were doing, the more success. And it sounds like you were very successful. I know you did well in the space. It's not like I mean, I'm sure in the short term, there were times you lost deals, you paid the price, like you said, but long term, it sounds like you probably I would imagine you ended up ahead of if you would have just played the game and lied all along. Yeah.
And I could sleep better at night.
Yeah, well, and you've got young kids and you're raising a family, you've got to be thinking about like, what kind of example am I setting for my family and all that stuff too. So you're at that point in life too, where I imagine that's even more important. But it's important for us all not to lose sight of that wherever we are in life or our careers or whatever. So, well, thank you for being here again. I really appreciate it. you are going to be part of our upcoming Digital Stratosphere conference again later this year. But so keep an eye out for that in September in Denver, Digital Stratosphere conference. But you're also hosting a conference, and you also have a forthcoming or a book you're writing. Tell us a little bit about those two things before we wrap up here, if you don't mind.
Yeah. So actually, the week after I'm hanging out with you guys, we are putting on our second Ignite Digital Leadership Conference. And so I mentioned earlier that a lot of what we focus on is this concept of digital leadership. And that's how do you lead teams successfully internally and build authority in the market to generate revenue, and how those two ideas, along with personal growth, kind of all come together to help prepare what we're calling like really the new generation of leadership. We desperately need people that are willing to step into true leadership roles rather than kind of being these followers that fall into the FOMO cycle, that fall into these traps that we've been talking about today. So the conference is focused both on leadership as well as external authority, content creation, and how to share your knowledge and your expertise out with the world. So Eric joined us for our first event, and I hope you would agree with me when I say it had a little bit of a different vibe in terms of networking and really like building an intentional space for people to build relationships and get comfortable with the idea of stepping outside of their comfort zone is really what the focus of that is. So that will be September 3rd in Madison, Wisconsin. And then shortly on the heels of that, I don't have an actual publication date, but we're working through the manuscript right now. My husband and I, James, are co-authoring a book on the concept of digital leadership. So it'll be breaking down what internal, external, and personal kind of growth and leadership look like, and the different components that kind of play into this concept of how to step into a leadership role and not fall into being a follower disguised as a leader. So a lot kind of bringing all of my experience on the enterprise technology and change management side together with the work that we're doing, helping companies build external authority and generate revenue. So really looking at how all of that comes together and how we've been able to help our clients really embody this digital leadership concept.
Very cool. Do you have a title for that book yet, or a name for it yet?
So I actually have a meeting after this to start talking through finalizing it. But it will be something tied to the concept of digital leadership and how to be a leader in a world full of followers.
Nice. Well, that's cool. I'm excited to read it and see it, and I'll ask for your autograph when it comes out.
Well, I've got my signed copy of your last book around here, so I expect the next one as well.
Exactly. You'll definitely get a copy. And yeah, my book will be out in April called Welcome to the Machine. It's about all the stuff we're talking about here today, the way the industry works, the way it's rigged, the way it's wired, all that stuff. And again, just in the spirit of understanding it so you can navigate it. So I'm excited for your book, though. It's about time you wrote one. I think you're long overdue for it. So I'm glad to hear you're doing that. So
it's a lot of work, though. Gosh, Eric, third one in. I don't know how. Yeah, it's a lot of work, but we're excited for it.
Well, I will admit I am using AI to help me. So I'm not writing it all by hand like I did the first. The first book was all by hand. This one's largely AI driven, but it's got my voice. It's pretty cool. I'm excited for it. So I'm excited for yours too. But and excited for the conference. So check out the Ignite conference. What's your website again? Just so people know where to find
Ignite Digital Leadership Conference.com.
Okay. And then Roloff Consulting is the company. Emma Roloff is the guest. Thanks again for being here today. And thanks to the audience for the great questions. We're going to edit this podcast. We'll add some more additional content to it. We'll make it a formal episode of Transformation Ground Control, which is the podcast you can find on all the audio podcast platforms. It streams every Wednesday to all the social media platforms. So you'll see the official episode of this interview come out here shortly. So be sure to check that out. You can go to transformationgroundcontrol.com to see all the past episodes. So thanks for being here today. We'll be back same time, same place next week. Hope you'll have a great week in the meantime, and we'll see y'all soon. Take care. Thanks again, Emma.